Good morning. Thank you for all being with us today. I know we are the last slot before lunch, so I promise we'll make this worthwhile. As Deanna said, we're here to talk about mentorship, which is both really, really important and complex, but also for this particular conference, it's a really important piece because it can help us accelerate the kind of change that we want to see in our industry. So it's one of the reasons that we at Venables Partners have launched Fellow, which Aisha talked about just prior to the break, which is an app-based community to help women connect with women and mentor in a slightly more fluid fashion. So I encourage you, download the app, enjoy the free trial. The more people on it, the better it'll be. So I'm excited about Fellow, but more excited about these two amazing women who I have with me today, who know more about mentorship than anyone I've met before. So let me introduce, first of all, Sarah Spitz, who is founder of Spitz Fire. Sarah's done a lot of research on the matter of how you create great mentorship relationships. In fact, a thesis recently on the subject, so has a ton of experience and research to share. And also Michele, who is a global board member for talent at Forsman, Bodenfors, who have brought in a really innovative approach to mentorship. And so she can share some of the experiences that they've had too. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I thought I'd spare your blushes, but not my own, and just give you one quick story of my own experience of mentorship, which is mildly embarrassing, so don't judge me. But it will give us I think, some context to discuss. So here goes. Imagine myself, 25 years younger, fresher-faced, marching into the office of my then CEO to announce dramatically my departure and my resignation based on being burnt out at the age of 27, which is ridiculous. The response, though, was pretty amazing. The person in charge was a lady called Scylla Snowball. She's now Dame Scylla Snowball. That's how good she is at dealing with people like me. So she responded by saying, "Sit down." So I did. And she pulled from her drawer a cell phone that was about as big as a drawer, because this is the 90s. And she said, "Listen, go take a vacation. Go anywhere you like, for as long as you like. Just do one thing. Just call me every Friday and tell me where you are and what you're doing." Sounded like an amazing deal, so I took it. And I went to find myself for 3 months. And every Friday, I dutifully called. And she, amazingly, put down her job running the biggest agency in Britain to speak to me about finding myself. And bit by bit, we spoke less about me and more about her as the weeks passed. And through those conversations, I fell back in love with advertising. I came back. I worked for her for 12 years. She spoke at my wedding. She keeps me out of trouble today, still. And what it taught me as an example of mentorship is that at the heart of it, there has to be some kind of human connection. If it's all business, it remains all business. So that was a very organic relationship that we built. And I'm fascinated to know, does it have to be organic? Or can we create structures to speed up this process? Can we actively pair people up? What has your experience told you?
I love that story. It's so great. And you're so lucky.
Not that embarrassing.
No, lucky. You're so lucky to have her. So your story, I mean, you got a good one. But most of our mentoring relationships are exactly what you're talking about. They happen because there's some kind of chemistry. Yeah. And people are naturally drawn to each other, and then they begin a relationship. And that's what we're familiar with. Mm-hmm. And it's great. I mean, my mentors were relationships like that too. The problem with that is that it's based entirely on luck of the draw. Yeah. So if you don't luck into that kind of relationship, what do you do? Yeah. And as humans, we engage in this phenomenon called homophily, which means choosing people who are most like ourselves. Yeah. And it's unconscious. So we do that, and then those are the people that we tend to have mentor relationships. And what happens is that we end up creating leaders. Ourselves. Yeah, we replicate ourselves. So if you've got the majority of people in leadership creating more leaders like themselves, you're not doing anything to open up pathways. And then the other piece of it is that there's fewer mentors or fewer more senior people who are women and people of color, and it's harder for junior people to feel connected. So there's that whole dynamic. So you're right, I did this. So I did an MBA, and I spent the past couple of years researching and interviewing hundreds of people on this subject. And what the big discovery was, yes, this is how these relationships have generally worked. And there are a lot of companies that are putting time and attention into doing mentoring programs, but they often don't work because people don't know how to connect with one another. Yeah. So the discovery is we can actually take mentoring and teach people how to have better conversations and connect better with one another rather than sticking to disparate people in a room and saying, talk once a month and learn something from each other. We can put people together who might not be naturally attracted to one another and give them the ability to build connection, and this is totally possible. And when you do that, and you've got people looking a little bit outside of themselves and connecting with people who are different than them, you have the ability to grow a whole new generation of leaders of all different kinds.
I know you've done that a lot with your clients in terms of helping consult them. When it comes to agencies, Michele, I mean, what frameworks or what environment needs to be in place for such an approach to work, if it's an innovative approach like that, but what do you need to do beforehand? How do you make the water ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our point of view at F&B is that modern mentorship, to use the title of the panel, really flows in various different directions, right? That's really where we should all be and where the future of this thing is going, rather than in more traditional hierarchical ways of working, advice and guidance and direction comes from the top. And that's not how we work as an organization. That's not how people sort of form communities. So at F&B, mentorship is cross-gender, cross-generational, cross-ethnicity, to really sort of build this sense of community. But it's the pre-work that really matters, right? So we have a fertile ground for inclusion programs like this to thrive because we put the collective above the individual, and we train people on empathy and active listening so that they're entering into these conversations with the tools to form authentic relationships, because I couldn't agree more. There's such a sense of homogeneity if we just sort of lean on the people that we feel most comfortable with, and that's not what we're all here talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have to, I mean, if your culture isn't the right kind of culture in the first place, to embrace this kind of program, it'll simply fail. So there's almost a bigger piece of work to be done first, which is, do you have a good culture? Does it embrace this kind of diversity and change? Right. So when you think, Sarah, perhaps about what agencies can do, what kind of practices are best practice to put in place, are there any specific things or guidelines that we can take to make sure that it works as well as it does at BIF?
Yeah. So there's a couple of thoughts. So agencies specifically, one thought that, or one practice that I think people can be really cognizant about is that as agencies, we're really focused on our billable hours. And particularly for senior people, they bill at a higher rate, and that's the relationship between the client and the agency. So if you're incentivized to be as billable as possible, then you're not incentivized to use your time in other ways. Not only are you not incentivized, it's not okay. So as a cultural movement, the agency has to be willing to have you devote your time in other ways. And I don't just mean like if you're a creative director reviewing work and giving feedback on the work. Like, as you said, a mentor relationship is much broader than just the work. So how can people invest their time? Are they encouraged to? And what kind of cultural tenets can be put in place to allow for that?
Yeah. So breaking away from billing by time would be awesome as a start.
Probably.
Generally.
Generally, yeah.
So tell me, Michele, if you think about the structure you put in place, because I know you have sort of 3 specific tracks that have been the foundation of your specific and innovative approach. Are there things that you can talk about in those different tracks that would help us kind of break down some of those barriers?
Yeah, sure. And I love your earlier point of like, if your culture's already shit, dropping in a mentorship program in the center of it all and then like hoping for the best is never going to work. So I've been with the organization about 3.5 years, and there's a ton of work that we put into it. And so we do have 3 tracks. There's a traditional career mentorship track where someone helps to mentor and sponsor someone else within the organization to help knock down obstacles, provide quick advice, and make introductions so that opportunities are opened up for them. There's a second mentorship track for parents, so new, future, expecting parents who just want some support throughout the entire process. It might be themselves, it might be because they want advice for their partner. We pair those people up with existing parents. That has really helped with re-onboarding after parental leave and retention of parents. 53% of our entire global organization is parents too, so it's something we keep our eye on. And then the third one, which I find to be the most progressive, the most interesting, and which was built in partnership with our employees, is a reverse mentorship program. And that's where we intentionally pair people who are different than one another. And it's worth noting that this is a voluntary program. It's run twice annually, and we're really thoughtful about the pairs. So if you're entering into this reverse mentorship, it's because you want to learn something specifically. At the base level, it might be that a media buyer wants to learn about brand strategy, but we get really deep into these relationships now, so maybe it's a man wanting to be paired with a female who wants to learn how to be a better ally. Maybe it's a generational difference where someone with 30 years of experience wants to be paired with someone who's a year or two into their experience to mine that gap. So it's really rewarding. And you know, I think I've talked about it before, but there's a little bit of some pre and post care to ensure that these matches make sense.
Yeah.
And if they don't make sense, to make those changes throughout the process to ensure that, you know, we're creating better paths for these different types of talent within the organization so that our leadership over the course of time represents the markets that we're serving for our clients.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think we all think about mentorship as something which is advice given from above, when in reality there's a ton of value in advice that will come from below, from the sides, and so both the older and the younger are going to benefit an enormous amount from it, and actually seeing it as more of a two-way street is really healthy.
Yeah.
So if you think about some of the barriers, because as I said at the beginning, mentorship is complex, it's a really tricky beast, and we can get it wrong, and I think we all have the best of intentions, but we don't always land the results that we want. What are the kind of main barriers that you two would potentially identify, and what are the things that we might want to do to overcome any of those? Sarah, do you have a
Yeah, one thing I want to share, and it's sort of building off where you just ended, which is, you know, you help navigate the pairings and if they're not working, and that's great. I mean, you guys are so ahead of the game on this. It's just wonderful to hear. But, you know, lots of people are trying it and finding their way through it, so not everyone has those skills in place. But one thing that I think is really important for people to think about is the responsibility of the mentee. Because we, to your point a moment ago, we think about this as a hierarchical relationship. Yeah. And you know, that will probably always exist in some form because you're seeking knowledge from someone more senior and experienced than you. So there may be that hierarchy in your job level. But if you're gonna have this kind of relationship, you have to have some vulnerability, you gotta be honest, you gotta be authentic, otherwise it just stays superficial. So in order to do those things, be vulnerable, be authentic, you gotta agree to be on the same level for the purpose of the relationship, because it opens it up. And then the mentee has responsibilities too. You're not just following the mentor's lead. And one of those things is to be active in the conversation. One of the tricky things about a mentor, the organic mentor relationship, is that you don't always know you're in it until you're in it. It's a little bit like dating. So once you figure that out, you know, be proactive and have those conversations. And that person might be your boss, and that might feel a little awkward. But when you do that, you then get to be more proactive about how to design the relationship, including changing it and ending it, or you know, whatever the needs are. When you're in a more formal relationship, one where you're assigned or where you request that someone's your mentor, it's easier. You know that relationship's starting, you can start the ground rules from the beginning. But in all cases, like, being able to talk about it early and often is really important as it evolves.
It's fascinating what you say about vulnerability. It's like any relationship, again, and it's probably the responsibility for both parties to show some, because it allows us to get out of the judgmental zone and into we're both vulnerable, we both have had good experiences, bad experiences, we screw things up sometimes, and then I think that will create the kind of environment where you can trade advice without feeling that you're exposing yourself in a way that's just going to make your boss potentially feel less good about you. What about you, Michele? Any potential specific barriers that you feel that need to be knocked down and that we could knock down?
Yeah, in order to create a more diverse leadership set, I think these structured programs are really important, right? Because for those that might not be as vulnerable or brave to ask people for advice or mentorship, there's a system around them to support them. But for those that are a bit more comfortable, I think the word mentorship and being a mentor or a mentee comes with like a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility that could be quite stressful for some types. I know I felt that. So I'd say, mentorship can just be a quick text to someone from the outside when you're in your own personal meltdown and you need some advice, or can be someone internally to just help with some, very small things. So to take the weight off of the word a little bit and just think about it as building some relationships and having your own little sort of board of directors to support you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, the word mentorship brings such gravitas and weight to it. It can feel too much when it's, in reality, all you may need is just a little bit of advice on a subject today. That might be it. It's interesting because we had the same debate actually when we started to build Fellow, our app community, because a lot of the time you don't want long-term advice. You just need a moment in time. And a lot of the time, mentors and more senior people are scared that there will be a huge time suck for them. And in reality, if you can use technology as we have in every other aspect of life, to allow you to do these things in the cracks in life, on an app, in a taxi, on the way somewhere, as opposed to the structured, this is a lunch and I must spend time with him or her. So I think, seeing it in a more granular fashion and a more modern fashion, I think can help us all gain advice. The other thought that I had in terms of a barrier I'd love your perspectives on is the very industry we're in. And we are naturally incredibly competitive, and most of the people in this room are going to go back to their agencies and immediately think of one another as the enemy, not the friend. And the tricky thing about mentorship is, particularly for women, is there are not enough mentors inside of our agency to give the counsel that people need. So how do we break down barriers between agencies? Because the second that we start looking at this issue, which is far bigger and more important than any one agency can solve, is the moment that we'll be able to actually make real progress. So apps like Fellow that help break down the walls and allow you to mentor someone in my agency to mentor someone in your agency are really important. But I think the way in which we make ourselves just park our competitiveness just for a moment and allow the walls to come down and tackle an issue which is so important for driving diversity in our industry is really key. So I'm going to let us break for lunch, which is, I think, what we're all thinking about and all wanting. Thank you all very much for your time. I wish you the very best of luck in finding a mentor. Download the app, enjoy it, and the very best of luck to you all.
Thank you.